today we have some of the leaders in marketing represented at this panel, and I'll shortly introduce them. There's a saying that's attributed to the Chinese, may you live in interesting times. It's supposed to be a blessing or a curse. There's a big debate online whether it's really a blessing or a curse. There's also a debate whether the Chinese ever said that. They claim they didn't. But if you're in marketing, we certainly live in interesting times. If you look at the marketing horizon in terms of social media, mobile, big data, there's a lot happening in the field of marketing. And the CEOs are always coming up to the heads of marketing and say, hey, why don't we have the latest, sort of the shiniest toy? So this is a very fun time, but it's also a very challenging time. So we thought, let's get the leaders in this area and cut through some of the noise to really understand how things are changing. So it's my pleasure to introduce the three panelists, and let me do that in the order in which they're seated. John Iwata is the Senior Vice President of Marketing at IBM. IBM, as you know, is one of the most valued brands in the world. John leads IBM's marketing, communications, and citizenship organization, and he also led the team that developed the Smarter Planet strategy. Second on the panel is Arun Sinha, who's the Chief Marketing Officer at JP Morgan. He's responsible for marketing and growth at Global Wealth Management. So I assume many of you in the audience are his target. He's looking for high net worth clients all the time. After he stepped down as the Chief Marketing Officer at Zurich Financial, for the last 2 years, he was also on the faculty with me teaching. We introduced a new course called The Role of a CMO. And to the best of our knowledge, it's one of the few schools in the country that offer such a course. And finally, on the panel is Gina Boswell. She's the Executive Vice President at Unilever, who manages a $5 billion personal care portfolio. She's a member of Class of '89 and has received several honors, including Marketer of the Year in 2012. I'd like to give a warm welcome to all three of them. So I'm going to join them, sit there, and so we thought we'll keep this interactive. So I'll start with a couple of questions for the panelists, and then after the first half an hour or so, we'll open it up for questions from you, from the audience, for them. In between, we'll do a little fun thing. We'll use some interactive technologies to poll some of the questions we have prepared. So let me go there and start the process. Great. So my first question really is, if you look at what's happening in the market, people talk about billions of people connected to the internet, at least 3 to 4 billion people. Then if you look at the number of devices connected to the internet, I hear numbers from hundreds of billions to even 1 trillion. So the question, John, for you is, and you're in the middle of this, what is big data? How do you look at it? And how is it going to change marketing? And perhaps how is it going to change markets?
Yeah. Well, you've already alluded to what makes data big. What's the big in big data? Because we've always had information and data. It's because of the phenomenon of what we would call in the tech industry or at IBM, instrumentation, which is a very peculiar term. But if you think about it, when you can instrument something, you begin to see what's actually occurring, right? And because of the effects of technology, we can now embed instrumentation or computers or sensors into everything. So starting with us, I mean, we're obsessed with mobile and social. So it is true. I mean, social is creating an enormous amount of data because we as humans are producing it. But for those of you who are wearing the Fitbit or the Nike Band, you're producing data that way. Cameras attached to intersections, attached to buildings, medical records being digitized, RFID tags being attached to products and supply chains. All of these are ways for us to collect data, and it's all kinds of estimates about its growth, right? We believe it's growing 40% a year, just the amount of data in all its forms. Probably the more interesting part of that explosion is that 80% of it, we estimate, is what we would call unstructured data. So traditionally, a computer, columns and rows, databases, but most of what's being created today is unstructured. So yes, it's imagery, videos, blogs, tweets, and posts, photographs, medical records, as I said. And so the promise of data for the marketer or for the company goes back to our core missions, right? I should have taken your course about the role of the CMO, so I'm positing here. We have to understand markets and customers. We think about what to market in terms of helping drive innovation, and we think about things like pricing and margins, about the balance between supply and demand and all the rest. I think every part of that yields to the phenomenon of big data. And it isn't the data, it's we can finally know with some degree of conviction and certainty what is actually happening with the consumer customer, with the supply chain, even with our workforces. And so therefore, we are still practicing marketing as we've known it, but we have new tools and instruments to be much more precise, to drive greater effectiveness and ROI. There's a lot to be said about use cases. One of the ones that probably CMOs talk a lot, as I've discussed it with them over the last couple of years, is of course one-to-one, right? Understanding the customer not as a segment, but as an individual. And even if you can't get to an individual, you think about people understanding them as cohorts based on their actual behavior versus a demographic or something that we impose on a population. And we can only do that today because they are declaring their segmentation to us, explicitly or implicitly, by all of the signals they're throwing off from, yes, where they're going on the web, but also, if you've not turned it off, where you are physically with your cell phone. Interesting statistic just ran across that the majority of adults with smartphones have them within arm's reach 22 hours of the day.
I need to check my pocket here.
I asked, what about the two? And they said, well, they're showering and bathing and other things.
They can't use a baggie?
And I think it's something like 70% of us will roll over and look at our device before we get out of bed. Why is that important? Well, for the device makers, that's amazing. But the thing is, what are you using that for? So if you're searching and you're hitting sites, if you're downloading apps, if you're doing things, you're throwing off signals. If you're GPS, you're telling us where you are. If you combine that with the point of sale thing, with what you might be tweeting and blogging about, you start to integrate this knowledge about people's intention and their behavior. And of course, you apply analytics to begin to predict what they might. That's why next best action, next best offer is so topical, is can I begin to know you not on a demographic basis, but based on your behavior, and then almost like epidemiology, if you're in a cohort, can I cause you to behave differently? And whether it's your journey to purchase or something else. And this is very much a very new thought, that we can think about the market and the customer in new ways. And then the other use cases about supply demand and the employee engagement, all that yields to data.
So I think there are two interesting sort of comments that I want to emphasize. One is what John mentioned about unstructured data. Around 80% is unstructured. What's interesting about the unstructured data is, A, it was hard to analyze it before. One of the most common places you would get unstructured data before was like customer sales support or customer service, which none of the marketing people would traditionally listen to. And you would often hear there's some good ideas you can get from that, but it's very hard to analyze that. So the unstructured data, the other advantage of unstructured data, I think, is it's the data that's produced in the context of your normal behavior, as opposed to somebody giving you a survey and asking you to do a checklist, like, on a 9-point scale, what do you think? So there's certain advantages of unstructured data really reflecting people's preferences. The second thing I think you said, which I think is very interesting to me, is around, it's not just better analysis of individual behavior, but it's also, that leads to new business models. So if you look at so many companies that are coming up, from Uber to other type of sharing economy, it's really based, and you mentioned GPS-based stuff that really creates new business models and fundamentally can change, how you operate this. Not to pick on a company, but one of the challenges with Weight Watchers today is, can you be replaced by a Fitbit, a Fuel Band, or a combination of things, even though it may not be the same value proposition as what Weight Watchers is offering, but in people's mind, it might be close enough, and it really threatens the the core of what the company is up to. Arun, do you, I know that regulations is obviously your bank is heavily regulated. How do you guys think about big data?
So we, day in, day out, we breathe, eat, drink data. That's how we actually have, because everything, the biggest thing for us is trust with our consumers or customers that we have. So their information that we house. So the challenge from a big data is not so much whether we have been using it or not. Our case becomes like, how do you really maintain the privacy? How do you really leverage this for the right customer, and you're not going beyond these certain areas, because these privacy walls are very strong. Having said that, I think the regulations are coming in financial services industries, as all of you know, the regulations are coming really fast and strong, and actually big data can help us in that area. For example, we have, every bank is going through that. We call it this AML or KYC, anti-money laundering, or know your customers. That's mandated by the regulators all across the world. So now we really need to understand our not only customers, but where they get their funds from. So if you want to transfer $100,000, you really have to tell us that this is the right money that you're giving us, not necessarily you're getting in some part of the world where it's not accounted for, right? For that purposes, our data and understanding what we have becomes really critical. And that becomes a way of our business life, not necessarily trying to influence consumers, but trying to do our business by understanding data better.
Gina, did you want to add anything to?
Yeah, no, first of all, I just want to back up for a second, because as an alum, I'm having like a surreal moment being in this beautiful building. So I just want to thank you for this incredible opportunity. 25 years ago, when we were in a much more humble place there, albeit cozy. This is just amazing, so thank you for inviting me. In terms of big data, we've always been a fairly data-driven company, Unilever, and so certainly I think that the points that both John and Arun talked about, which is first is understanding, using big data to understand, and the other is usage. To me, we have a lot of understanding, albeit to the point made by John, unstructured is a really big issue, right? Because there's so many bits that are coming. But I'm confident, as I'm sure all of you are, that the dynamic, analytics tools that are now coming are going to really allow us to glean the insights there. So that's the understanding. But for me, the far more compelling piece is around usage. And what do we do to use that data real time to serve up very customized and tailored offerings at the moment? And how do we influence consumer behavior and maybe their wallet and so forth? That is the very exciting part. So we're spending a lot of time, and we're humans too, right? So we're also applying the strategic interpretation of what we're hearing. But it's been very fascinating for us to sort of set up quasi-command centers in places. Like, for example, in Tresemme, we had Fashion Week, which is a very big thing for one of the 27 brands that we have in the personal care portfolio at Unilever. And so we set up command centers that are sort of real-time, combing all the social media sites and so forth, and trying to figure out, well, what do we want to react to? And I think that's really interesting from a marketeer's point of view, because the understanding, you can go down a very black hole if you like. There's lots of people and resources dedicated to that, but it's what are we doing with that information? That's most exciting.
So you mentioned a little bit, we touched on privacy, so that we have a slide on question for the audience on privacy, and let's see, we get you to poll on this.
You can see it over there.
So trying this technology for the first time, hopefully it works, yeah. So how much do consumers trust? How? And well, this is right after Target.
I know, it's like kind of.
So it's not the right, you've been primed not to.
So everyone's voting? Yeah.
Okay, so data is disagree is sort of dominant. So John, this naturally comes back to you because as a business-to-business company, which is marketing to a lot of CMOs or CIOs for that matter, I'm sure you hear a lot about privacy from your client customers who might be concerned about their customers, or you might more generally. What is your take on sort of the debate? You know, some people say it's really not a real debate and consumers don't really mind, and so obviously the answer depends on the industry. So you must have thought about this issue quite a bit. So what's your take on this? Yeah.
Well, when I look at a chart like this, I see a great opportunity for IBM to help.
Yes.
because the question is worded around, or the statement is protection and security. I think if you asked it a little differently, I'm not suggesting you should poll differently. You often get into a discussion of what I like to call the cool but creepy future. Mm-hmm. And data security, like actually, hacking into and stealing my data, that actually yields to technology and protocols and management. But related to this, as we all move into a world of awash with data, you can think about two kinds of continuum, right? One is privacy and convenience. And try it at home or try it with your friends and say, do you like the idea that companies are collecting data about wherever you go on the net, or even your physical movements through GPS? No, I don't like it. Have you turned off cookies? Have you disabled GPS on your phone? Do you use Google Now? Most people I've talked to haven't disabled cookies, haven't turned off GPS, and for those of you who have tried Google Now, probably keep it on. Well, why not? And they go, well, it kind of creeps me out when I think about it, but it's really convenient. The other continuum is security and civil liberty. And that's one we'll debate as citizens for a long time. The trade-off between, on the one hand, perhaps a safe society, but also who's got all this information, and of course that's in the newspapers today. They're very much related, right? The government may have all this data, but so does Target, so does a film company, and the rest. As we've talked to CMOs about this, it does yield to behavior and to some degree of policy. And just a few principles that seem to guide, at least at IBM, what we do is, one is transparency. As long as employees and our customers know, what data do you have about me? Will you tell me? That goes a long way toward making people feel, comfortable or confident. Secondly, do I have control over it? Can I opt out? Mm-hmm. Can I say no? Can I turn it off? And then finally, it's our behavior, right? So when you say protected, part of that is, what are you doing with it? Mm-hmm.
Right.
Are you selling it? Yeah. Are you using it for things that I don't approve of? And as long as you're behaving in a way that's consistent for the value they receive, it doesn't have to be a coupon, but some value, whether it's convenience or knowing me or providing things that are relevant to me, they seem to be more comfortable allowing us being institutions, to have some knowledge of them at a very, very personal level.
It's interesting because I think what you're, I study a lot of decision making, and we call something called System 1 thinking, which is very intuitive and fast, where System 2 is more deliberative and careful and thought through. And I think privacy is a System 1 response people have. It's bad, like if you violate my privacy. And what you're suggesting is, if you get people into thinking about it logically, deliberatively on one hand, on the other hand, they say there are the benefits to sharing data that allows the firm to either target offerings better or give me, other types of offers. So it's very interesting that what kind of mindset people are and when they think about privacy. And I think what the responses are can change. And of course, logically, it varies a lot across the world, right? I assume that what's considered appropriate in the US is seen as much more problematic in Europe. And
or illegal.
Or illegal too, yeah. Right? So let me switch a little bit to branding, something that's dear to all the marketers' heart, and they're all experts at branding. So I'll start with Arun here, which is financial institutions, including your bank, are often seen as too big to fail. But the question is really, are they too big to brand? And so the question is really, given the range of products and services that companies like JP Morgan, IBM, Unilever, all of you are in. What do you see? What do you see the role of branding, and what do you see the challenges in addressing those?
So, and that's very, very interesting. On one hand, you can say financial services, why should they be doing any branding? Because they're going through so much pressure from external forces, regulations and all that. But that's the core of, branding is the core of our business. And why I say that the core of our business is that most often it's mistaken that you do branding, only advertising is branding. So going out to your consumers, directly talking to them through advertising, social media or other forms is the part of branding. But branding is more about your culture, your promise, what you do. So for financial services, I would say that no, they're not too big to brand. They can be brand, but how they brand it would be different. So the how part is more critical, I would argue, and IBM does that extremely well, that it's branding inside out as opposed to outside in. So in general, like Unilever and other places, you would find you do advertising, you create demand, and then get consumers coming and buying your products and services. To a large extent in financial services, and I would say even for IBM in some ways, is that how do you really equip your employees to become a marketer? So I would say that every employee is a marketer in financial services. So it's how you do branding, it's not what you do in terms of branding. So what does that mean? So now from an employee standpoint, the complexity goes, now not only they need to know about their products and services, and financial services, they really need to understand regulations extremely well. I just joined JP Morgan about a couple of months ago, and in 3 months, I have completed like 25 trainings. So I cannot do anything without going through all that training. This is regulation and understanding that quite well. So the employees go through that aspect. So understanding that, and now we're asking employees to step up even more and take your message, the culture, what you stand for, how you behave yourself, take that to your clients and customers as you go along. So it's a very complicated world that we are, and very true to the topic of the day. It's in a complex world that we live in, that the employees are all marketer and they have to understand the nuances of marketing. So half of our job is how to really help them become a marketer. How do you really teach them? So Ravi, you should come and join these banks and start teaching them how to do marketing.
Let's talk after the session, yeah. John, you have an interesting, Vimeo thing on branding at IBM. I really like it. It talks about, it's not about, and maybe you can talk to the audience a little bit, IBM brand and, how you think about it and how it's beyond, it's not about the products or services necessarily, but the character and the reputation. Love to hear your take on that, yeah.
Yeah, excuse me. Well, in our case, we're 103 years old this year, and unlike other companies that are as old or older, it's kind of hard to say what have we been doing for 103 years. I mean, the very first products from IBM were coffee grinders, clocks, cheese slicers, and then for those of you who know a little bit of our company, you'd start to say, well, punch cards, and then big vacuum tube things, and then typewriters, Mad Men, Selectric typewriters, the PC, and on and on, right? So, and yet we haven't had to rebrand ourselves many, many times. One conclusion is we've never wanted IBM to be known or to be defined by the things we are selling. So at least for us, that's a big strategic decision. That's a big one. We are not going to define the company by what we offer you to buy. What then defines the company? And the language we use is the character of the company. And by that we mean our purpose, we mean our values, and we mean how we are. And I heard a great quote from a colleague says, who you are is how you are, right? So it is your behavior as a business. I'm not talking about ethics. I mean, it's what makes you distinctively you. Right. So that constant, that character of the company, you mentioned Smarter Planet, which was launched in 2008. That came about because of a meditation around, we had gone through another big change in the company, selling the PC business and lots of things. getting into a whole set of new businesses, massive confusion about what IBM was. But we didn't answer it with an ad campaign or something, because we didn't want to put into your head the new portfolio, only to dynamite it out of your head 5, 10, 15 years later when we had marched on to something else. So instead, that meditation on character about, well, what exactly are we, what impact are we having on people's lives and business and society? You know, for that time period, for this time period, the answer was Smarter Planet. But that's where it came from.
Sure. Gina, at Unilever, so obviously CPGs are known as the mecca of branding, but you also have the corporate brand Unilever, which is traditionally not used as much, but I see more in the advertising. They've started to use it in the US more, and I used to see it used more outside in Asia a lot more. And so give us a sense of how you guys think about corporate branding and the role of what role it plays in the marketplace and of branding in general.
Yeah, sure. So Unilever, I would argue and venture to say, without maybe full statistics, that it's the largest brand that consumers actually do not know. I know you're very familiar, and the reason why I know this, that you're familiar with all the portfolio of brands that we do have is that there's, iconic brands like Dove and Suave and Axe and so many more, Hellmann's and so forth. So the 2 billion consumers are touched by our brands, every day, and yet no one is really quite clear on what Unilever is. And so we're seeking to change that a bit, and the reason for that is the platform that we also have, going back to this idea of purpose, it's called the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, and we want to make sustainable living commonplace. And so we actually use that as a platform to introduce the Unilever brand, so that at least when you see Unilever logo, which you'll see on the back of every package that you have, and you may have seen it in November, because we actually launched a long-term initiative called Project Sunlight. And the whole idea of Project Sunlight was, what if we could change the conversation to one of doom and gloom around, what if we mess it up and the planet is, we're consuming at a planet and a half, and how can we handle this? We actually asked people to engage with us and talk about what could it mean, what actions could we all individually take if we could create a brighter future. And so if you go on Project Sunlight and Google it, I think you'll see a fairly big initiative that we set about with no call to action as it relates to any of our brands. So it's not at all to the points John made about selling a brand of any particular. But what if we could change the conversation? And so we had people opting in, and it was some shattering of KPIs. It was like 60 million people that came in, and we called them Acts of Sunlight, and just gave some helpful tips around what we could do as individuals to create a brighter future for everybody. And the kinds of work that people are already putting in place, not just Unilever, frankly, because this is an area where typically you talk about brands as competitive advantage. We would love people to adopt this, right? We want to have a complete open sphere here where everybody takes on this sort of sustainable living. So we asked people to watch a pretty inspiring video about what if, if the place could change and we could be a much brighter future, and what could we do to join the movement. And while there was a lot of great interest and all that, and like I said, KPIs that were unbelievable, 653 million media impressions, so all the sort of marketeers are just, salivate at that, engagement rate. We also recognize that it's really early days, right? So as much as we wanted to bring the awareness to the Unilever brand and what the logo meant, we were also talking about, well, now what do we do? What is the call to action? So what you should look forward to is that in 2014, we will be doing much more beyond the narrative about how our brands individually and collectively actually help people alter their behavior such that we can actually, improve upon, the planet. And it's not just the environmental aspect, it's also the social value. So you're probably familiar with Dove is pretty important in this respect in terms of educating, millions of girls. So we felt like we were always doing this, and it was always at the benefit of our individual brands. But at the same time, we recognize that there's a corporate piece that sort of says, what if I could buy into the trust and the reliability and the fact that Unilever, because we are leaders and we are actually touching 2 billion consumers a day, what could we do to make sustainable living commonplace? And that was the intent behind it. So I think you'll see a bit more about it, but yeah, it's been one of those balances, because none of our brands carry the Unilever name in any shape, the possible exception of Lever 2000, but only if you're really thinking about it.
I think we're going to talk a little bit more about sustainability also and growth, and so it'll sort of, this conversation will connect to the next theme. But before that, I wanted to do 2 quick questions. I think the next one is on trust and brand of not companies, but individuals. Which of these do you consider the most trusted profession?
Guys, you got to say marketer at a bank.
The last one was clearly added for Arun's benefit, yeah. Okay, the data, please, yeah. Wow. Where's the
Did it.
college professor? Where are the 2 college professors in the audience? Yeah.
It was pick your poison, I bet, right?
Sorry,
That
Arun.
explains the trust factor, right? Yeah. Let's do another one. And this gets to the global brands and local brands. And maybe, Gina, there's a question for you here, given that you guys have what's called mega brands, some global, some local. Maybe we can talk a little bit about how the portfolio of Unilever thinks about regional brands versus creating global brands. Obviously, some economies of scale in doing the global brands, yet at the same time, there's supposed to be some benefits to regional brands. Perhaps you can tell us, like, how do you think about that? How many regional brands to keep in a portfolio?
Sure.
So we can just wait for a few
Oh,
seconds.
sure,
We'll just see what if they like local activities of global brands. Okay, so that's interesting. So a lot of people strongly agree that even if the brands are global, they expect them to do something locally. And this is really true of so many US multinationals as they move abroad. There's an interesting study that needs to be done. How much of their dollars in CSR is spent within a radius of 50 miles from the headquarters, as opposed to in all the countries where they made the revenues. And I suspect you'll find that a lot of the money is still spent close to the headquarters, as opposed to where the sales come from in the last 10, 15 years. So it's an interesting sort of a question. Sorry, Gina. Go ahead, Gina.
No, so I was going to say that I think the way this question is worded is perfect, because it is about sort of how do you use your global reach, right, from a branding point of view and from a scale benefit and so all the advertising and so forth that goes behind it. And frankly, the consistency, because in a flatter world, right, people are looking for that consistency. And while, we say it's a VUCA world, right, it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous, people look to brands for the things that don't actually change. So I think there is something very nice about a global brand keeping to its roots. But while you have global reach, certainly at Unilever, and we have it, it's also important to have local intimacy. And so in any of our global brands, while we have all sorts of guidelines about how to manage the brand with respect to what its positioning is and so forth, there's all sorts of local partnerships that we also develop to really bring it to life. So for example, whether it's connecting with, in Dove's case, with the Girl Scouts or Girls Inc. or any of those things, when you get to the grassroots of everything, this is when the magic comes in with branding, frankly. So we have, like most companies, a matrix that manages from a global and a regional and a local. But when it comes to the activation, which is certainly where my group comes in the US, we're very, very sensitive and attuned to the local insights that are generated. And when you lock a global insight, but that's locally felt. So for example, with this, how many of you have seen the Dove Sketches video, which was this forensic artist that basically asked people whether they, what they thought of themselves and how they looked. And the big insight around this, which we found was global in every part of the world, was that only 4% of women thought they were beautiful. And so when you can unlock a global insight, no matter whether you're in Asia or India, wherever you are in China, people all felt the same way, and that we actually need to be, thinking more positively about ourselves. but then watching the local pieces come to life because people really felt that that resonated. So that's just a few examples of how we manage it.
Any, John or Arun, any thoughts on this statistic here or anything more general about global brands?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just add our nature of the business tends to be more local. So we do decentralize in terms of the community involvement and engagement all across. So just to give you an idea, we do like about 5,000 events related to this in just the wholesale side of the business that I'm not even talking on the consumer side of the business, which is quite a lot. So I mean, in a year, if you do 5,000 of those, that's basically 20 a day. While we are speaking, 20 of those local events and community relevance are happening. What we find is that is the best way for us to reach out to our consumers. Not the big way just building a huge brand, because we are in a slightly good position because the brand is known, it's been around for 100 plus years, so it's been, and over time it has evolved. So for us, the best way to market is really going into local community and managing that.
It depends what you mean by give back. And I guess at one point in our history, we wrote a lot of checks. Today, yeah, we give donations or value in kind, but the main way that we do citizenship or CSR is through our people. I don't mean volunteerism so much. So if we've been inflicting on you for many years now our advertising around Smarter Planet, and if you've paid attention to any of those, they always end by talking about, I'm an IBMer. And it's interesting that we can put mass market advertising out into the world with a brand name, if you will, for an employee type, and not mystify people or cause people to laugh or to snicker or just like say that's kind of goofy that you call yourselves anything, right? I mean, by and large, we operate in 173 countries. IBMer is known, and it has brand attributes like you would expect. So when we do volunteerism, we want our people not just to volunteer of time and labor, but of their expertise. And so we have many different kinds of programs we've created where we send teams of IBMers into emerging markets or into our cities to apply not their labor or time, but if you're a finance person, if you're a marketing person, if you're an engineer, if you're a human resource person, that's what you're giving. So we give back through the IBMer because it gives them a lot of pleasure and engagement. But it's also what the community values is the expertise of our people.
So I think let me sort of move to another topic, which is around innovation. Traditionally, when I look at a lot of companies that I work with or consult with, the role of marketers in innovation varies a lot. Sometimes, like if you go to high tech, it's like, or even pharma for that matter. Okay, guys, here it is. Go and market it now. Like they had no role in sort of the early part, and you hear more and more sort of marketers getting involved in the early parts of the value chain as the innovation is taking place. But it does vary a lot across companies. So I thought and IBM just announced the new business unit, which I assume is a big deal to launch a new business unit called the Watson. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what Watson is about, and then what the role of marketing has been in terms of sort of bringing it to fruition as opposed to the strategy, CEO, and different stakeholders that must be involved in it.
Okay, so I don't know how many of you remember or know what Watson is. It's a system that our research division created, and it played Jeopardy 2 years ago, and it beat Ken and Brad, the two Jeopardy, the human champions, best ever at Jeopardy on national television, and it won. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay. So we didn't build a game-playing machine. We built a machine and Jeopardy turned out to be a wonderful vehicle to test out a whole new field, a whole new advance in computer science. And without getting too into the gorp, it relates back to this notion of unstructured data. So if you think of unstructured data as just the way we talk to each other, I'm not talking about voice recognition, right? Because voice recognition is becoming commonplace. All that is I know what you're saying as if you typed it in. Natural language is I understand the context, the syntax, the meaning, the illusion, the wordplay, the double entendre, the metaphor. That's what makes Jeopardy so fun or really hard, right? Is because I don't even understand the nature of the question, and then within 3 seconds, with confidence, I have to buzz in faster than the other two and be right. And Watson won. So we think Watson represents an entirely new class, not of computer, but a next generation of computing. And just real quick, we think there have been 2 prior in 100 years, right? First is tabulation. And so whether it's a time clock or a punch card machine, all it does is count. And then roughly 50 or 60 years ago, programmable systems, mainframe, PC, smartphone, your Fitbit thing, because it's been programmed to do something, if then, but it doesn't decide to do something differently. What Watson represents is cognitive systems that learn. And people like to think that Watson thinks, which is a whole different discussion. Watson doesn't think, we believe, but Watson does learn. And so you don't program Watson, you train it. So since the Jeopardy match, we have deployed Watson initially to healthcare at Memorial Sloan Kettering, WellPoint, MD Anderson, and Cleveland Clinic. And the best way to think about what Watson is don't think about a supercomputer like really fast and clanking through numbers. Think of the show House. So House is predictable, right? Somebody comes in, they're sick, convulsing, they get together. What is wrong with this person? Well, we think it's this. Well, then here's the treatment. Well, House would be about 5 minutes long if they got it right the first time, right? But they never get it right the first time, and before the commercial break, they're bleeding through their eyeballs or something. And then you go to another one, oh, let's run more tests, and finally, do they get it right or not? Why? What's happening there? It's because medicine, like marketing, like crime fighting, like a lot of things in life, is what is happening? Do I understand it from all of the different ways that I can understand it? And then what's available to treat it? So doctor, oncology, what are the symptoms? What are all of the available treatments? Marketer, do I understand you? Next best action or offer, over and over again, right? And it turns out Watson does that. I mean, so for the past 2 years, it's been mostly in healthcare, being trained by medical leaders to learn the language of medicine diagnosis. And it's not being programmed. It's not being saying, every time you see this, do the same thing. It's been learning. And what we announced yesterday is it's now ready to go to a whole new level where Watson can go into many different industries, like travel, like retail, and others, and on and on. But that's why we think it's a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal for IBM, but bigger than that, if we're right, it is like a next era of new kinds of systems, and they'll come from lots of other companies over time. Systems that learn, can ingest all the data, and with confidence collaborate with us on getting the right kinds of answers.
Without going sort of too much into depth, there was all this revolution in the 70s, or maybe even late 60s on artificial intelligence, but it was mostly embedded in sort of some kind of machines and hardwares, and so the learning, so there's a more learning here, I assume, than was happening in those kinds of systems. Is that the idea?
So we had a big seminar at one of our research labs a few months ago on artificial intelligence, cognitive systems. And you had Danny Hillis, from Thinking Machines. You had Daniel Kahneman, System 1, System 2. You had all these people. And one of the things I took away from that is AI, for a long time, thought that if you could get the algorithms correct with enough compute power, you can start to simulate thinking. Those are called deterministic systems, right? I still have to know, like, when you see this, do that. But we can never come up with enough rules or scenarios and put it into the algorithms to predict, and to know. But deterministic or probabilistic systems like Watson say, I've seen this before, I think this is the right thing. Oh, it turned out that it wasn't. I'm going to adjust my algorithms myself. And the next time I see it, pattern recognition, without human intervention. So in fact, Watson gets better at learning the more it learns. So it is not artificial intelligence kind of in the classic sense, at least from what I understand it.
Gina, any thoughts on innovation of what role marketing plays?
Huge. I mean, certainly in consumer packaged goods, it is the lifeblood of the business. And so to me, it's about how do you make sure you've got, the right balance of creativity, freedom to fail, cheaply and quickly, and those sorts of things. So we track what is our innovation as a percentage of the business because we know how vital it is. But it's not just the product itself, it's also in all the different offerings. And so with all this other exciting technology-based, ways to go to market, particularly with our retail customers, we're actively looking for innovative ways to bring our positions and our products and communicating them in ways that are very innovative. So yes, it is a huge topic, and we spend a large amount of our resources on all the way from the typical supply chain R&D and so forth, working with innovative partners and making sure that we have a partnership competency embedded. So yes, there's a fair amount of activity. It's all about, at least in the area that I lead, it's all about the equity, the brands, and the innovation. And then if you put people first, even before those two, we can create the magic that is brands.
So I think I'm going to open it to the audience with one final question for each of them, which is how's the role of marketing or marketers changing in the future? What do they see? I often hear from CMOs what they did. The skill set that they needed 5 or 10 years ago are not the same skill sets necessarily they need today or in the future. So maybe, let me ask each of you. Arun, start with you. Like, what do you think? And in Gina's case, maybe marketers who work for you since you are running a P&L. What kind of skill sets are you looking for in marketers? And then John.
Yeah. So, the world of marketing has evolved so much that traditionally whatever you knew about marketing and whatever skill sets you needed about marketing is actually meaningless right now. So today's marketer, basically we look at only 3 or 4 things. One, the science of marketing, that parts that you described earlier in terms of learning how to do all these different marketing channels, what is leverage data, what can you do with that. And then the other part is the art of marketing, right? So that's how do you really get close to your customers, how do you relate to them, what kinds of things you should be talking to your customers about. But financial services has one other hurdle to that. So not only just good in these 2 things, but also you have to be experts in regulation. So at some point, at somewhere, there've been a lot of conversation going on. Should the marketers be going through the same kind of training as any banker would do it? Which means, passing all kinds of regulatory exams and all before they become a marketer. And for us, now it's an open field. We are not sure how it's going to evolve into it, but that's a very definite thing. So now you need to have art, science, and on top of that, very good understanding in terms of regulation. And yet, you have to learn how to lead an organization.
And then to that, I would say, it is the art and the science, but it's also the creativity and the effectiveness, and I think it's the magic and the logic. And our CMO, Keith Weed, likes to say, we want to make marketing noble again. And it's getting back to the fundamentals of really serving, the consumer with the needs that they have. And while that sounds lofty, it's actually, quite basic. It's just about getting back to the core. I think, identifying current future needs, all the things we know marketing be very important, but I don't want to lose sight of the purpose-driven component of it, which is ever more important. As it relates to the P&L, certainly, while some of the equity innovation is given to us, it's about how do we commercially activate. So the marketing skills that we use in the marketplace are very much about how do you dynamically, sort of on the spot, do the kinds of things that, for example, Oreo did, in a legendary fashion during the blackout and so forth. And so for my team, who's looking at it from, what are we doing today now, it's very much people who are comfortable with really exercising great judgment in the moment. But again, magic and logic, and what if we could just put people first? And isn't that what marketing is all about anyway?
John?
Yeah, I think agree with these comments. I think behavioral science and behavioral economics, because if you're going to understand people at that kind of small cohort group level, you're going to want to understand what causes people to make decisions, and then have the mechanisms in place to try things out to see whether they actually respond to that. So that's like kind of the epidemiology. We might try hiring a few from epidemiology to see. But this behavioral science, I think, is really important. The other one, it isn't really so much a skill set, but I'm finding that I'm spending more time, and my team's time, not only with the CIO on technology, which is not surprising, but with the human resources. And I think it gets to this idea that, how you are is who you are, and there's no evading the fact that not just the customer-facing people, the customer service people, or the salespeople, but everyone, right? It bears on the brand. My neighbor is an IBMer, and how are they? Or I'm connected to, 60 million people are connected to IBMers on LinkedIn. 60 million people. So if you talk about brand impressions or brand experience, you got to pay attention to that, right? So, and you can't do that without your partnership with human resources, and that's been a kind of a surprising thing in the last couple of years.
Can you give a concrete example of this partnership with human resources? What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, in this past year, I think one of the things that I entered, and we just turned in our yearly results. So the top of my list was something I didn't enter the year knowing I was going to have to work on, which is really weird, right? And we ended up building a MOOC inside of IBM, online university, and it's mobile and instrumented, and we're headed toward personalized learning for the whole workforce. And it's because we want IBMers to have certain kinds of knowledge and confidence and competencies so they can go sell things and all the rest, but it's for everybody, right? So the idea of what IBM is about, what our strategies are, and very specific things around our portfolio, how do we engage IBMers and get their skill levels up and all the rest? That's a classic HR responsibility, training and development, or whatever you want to call it. But it was married with marketing because it was also this brand thought of the character of the company, plus we will have some very specific business objectives. And HR is very capable at IBM, but the idea of building a MOOC, mobile-enabled and instrumented with data, and all that, like stuff like that, we needed to do that in partnership. And it was kind of an amazing thing. And I think that's indicative of this convergence of the people and the culture with the brand.
Great. We'll open it to questions from the audience, and if the question is for a specific individual, please let us know that as well. There's a microphone.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Julian Minenberg, class of '90, and I noticed with all three panelists that as you look from a corporate lens and try to get your brand message about the company out, Unilever, beyond its brands, et cetera, as mentioned by each of you in different ways. I'm curious how you try to value the next investment dollar that goes out the door on one of the brands that has the ability to build the business, give back in the various ways that you described in your comments, versus investing in the corporation. So you've added yet another layer of imagery, and with so many companies over so many decades, sort of trying the same trick in various ways and having, in my humble opinion, moderate, if not poor success. I'm wondering how you see it and what's different this time around.
So if I can just reframe the question, is your question about how do we decide how to allocate resources between the global investment for the brand, the corporate investment versus the individual brands?
Yeah, yes, to some extent, but also that road has been hoed, maybe not quite as fancy and not quite as insightfully, but many companies over many decades have proudly strutted what that company's all about.
Right.
And people largely, in the end, are probably too self-oriented to not see what's in it for them. And therefore, maybe the company's attributes go up, but I don't know if the stock price goes up, and I don't know if the ability of the company to move the needle on its consumers goes up. I doubt it, to be honest. And that said, it's still dollars out the door, and therefore it's an allocation question as well as
Right.
so why is this time any better than the last couple of hundred companies that did that question?
Yeah, I think this time is, we're kind of at a no choice inflection point, and that is that this has to be done particularly by market leaders. So there's an obligation almost that we talk about what is plaguing society in general if we really want to be a big community player. And so it actually goes, some people ask us the question, well, where's the ROI? So while I can tell you that we've got marketing mix modeling ad nauseum on every one of our brands that can tell you what that payback is, based on, feature and display at a Walmart or a Target versus the next, digital spend, advertising, and so forth. What do we do with these things that are more purpose-driven, and then in particular on the global brand? And the answer is it doesn't matter much to us from that perspective because, well, first of all, it's not a huge amount. Secondly, it is something that statistically we know that a company, that a consumer, when they purchase anything, they do buy into the trust and the integrity of the brand, of the products that are being brought to them, and the corporate sort of parentage that's out there. So while I can't tell you to the same degree of granularity that the investment on a particular product within a particular brand, such as a Dove or an Axe or a Suave is, I can tell you that, given the modest amount of dollars that we are spending, but then using them in very smart, creative, viral ways, the bang is definitely there for the buck. But I don't believe with Paul Polman's vision that we are really seeking to measure that in any sort of typical shareholder ways. I mean, this is one, we're playing the long game on this. And the reason why we're playing the long game is because when you touch 2 billion consumers, somebody ought to be playing the long game. And we need to inspire that kind of change. So I think when you look at the ROI from that perspective, it feels like it's the right thing to do for us.
Questions?
So talking about Paul Polman says that Unilever is going to double their volume and half their environmental footprint by 2020. In doing so, as a marketing academic, I have to believe that there are some inherent conflicts. And the question is to all three of you. So JP Morgan is in the news, has been in the news quite a bit of late in terms of paying heavy fines in terms of whatever has gone down in the past crises and so on. So how do you deal with increasing volume and pushing business, and at the same time trying to do better for the environment and trying to do better for society? And what exactly do you do when there is kind of a trade-off that faces you at the point of decision making?
Who wants?
I can, since you mentioned JP Morgan, I'm not going to comment on what's going on. But I think what's going on from our business, which means not just JP Morgan, all of financial services, there is a convergence there going on. So it's the customer service is where we are really focused on. So anything business related, anything outside, inside, anyway that we look at, even settlement, non-settlement, it's all related to the customer service aspect of it. We talked about earlier innovation. Our innovation is all focused on customer service. Any foundation giving that we have or events that we do in this local markets, they're all related to customer service. So there's some ways there is an ROI that you would see at the end of the day. And that's the connection that we see it in there. Our entire marketing is focused on customer service.
And then I think as it relates to, you're correct, that the vision is to double our business while having our environmental footprint, but also increasing the social value of the brands that we have. And that does require us to develop new and improved ways of doing business. But I have to say, we don't consider it to be an inherent conflict. And the reason is because when we truly push ourselves, because of our scale in particular and working with very innovative suppliers and so forth, we've actually been surprised at just how much we can decouple, that. And so examples of that, I mean, we've got numbers of them, and I urge you to look at online for our sustainable report, which we're very transparent about, because there's still so much work to be done, to your point. I think, from an innovation perspective, we are constantly looking for ways to innovate and to be able to reduce things and move to, more of a conscious consumption, because yes, there's consumption, and that, at the heart of it is happening. But as long as it's conscious and we're inspiring people to change their behavior, but also doing our part to creatively come up with ways to reduce footprint. Now, in our case, much of the impact doesn't happen in the manufacturing of our products, but actually in the life cycle of those products. So while we come up with a product and we can reduce, we've got bimodal resin that we're moving to, we've got all sorts of like the, Vaseline petroleum jelly. I mean, 250,000 pounds of resin reduced already just by, really working with a very innovative lens on the package. But at the end of the day, if you're spending more than 4 minutes in the shower using our products, then all that is gone. So we've been doing all sorts of things to, really activate with our retail customers. So we, ongoing, we do a program with Recycle Bank and Walmart where we actually have a Suave turn off the tap approach, which is just the simple little, nothing really, state-of-the-art sort of, technology or expensive in any way. A little pebble that you put at the bottom of your shower. And when it, lights off, it sort of, alarms that you've really reached your 4 minutes. So what if we could change that kind of behavior? And while that is a daunting task to, to maybe in some cases deprive people of their indulgent shower time, the fact that we could build awareness and move the needle on that, I think, is the most important thing. So to answer your question, we don't approach it from an area of trade-offs and conflicts at the start. We look for it as the business model. What if we just had sustainability at the heart of our business model?
Yeah, I think one thing it does, and having these sort of broad missions, it provides a lens to the organization, like which will drive the innovation and the focus of the company. So in other words, once you start looking at the business through the lens of sustainability, the innovation starts looking at how do I make the plastic less, how do I make the, the material that goes into it have lower emissions, how do I make sure that it gets recycled, But the interesting thing is the perceptions do vary from reality. We did this study where, if you reduce the amount of plastic in a bottled water, like Fiji water, let's say, but it comes from Fiji, and if you look at the life cycle of the emissions, it's really how much of the carbon footprint is getting it from Fiji to New York or New Haven, as opposed to the little less plastic you now have. But if we ask consumers, like, which one do they feel is better environmentally, they'll often tell you, oh, this one uses less plastic. Because the other part of the value chain is often not that central or visible to them. So it's an interesting question about when companies look at the carbon footprint, they look across the entire value chain from raw materials to production to distribution to consumption to disposal. But consumer looks close to their point of consumption, really, where they buy it and how do they dispose it. So it's an interesting sort of psychological process through which you can get benefits by doing things that necessarily don't reduce the carbon footprint. Any other questions, thoughts?
I should also mention, to your point, if you want to read some really interesting things on this, look at circular economy. A woman in the UK has done a tremendous amount of work to look at circular economies and how, taking recycling all the way to a whole other level where people can actually truly do well by doing good in terms of business results. So it's an interesting area that we're watching.
Questions, comments? Yes.
I can just yell if you want.
She's right there. Yeah.
Thanks. So I was wondering, for me, when I market, I find that the best way to affect people is to turn my customers into marketers themselves and to sort of pass down the responsibility onto them. And I was wondering, how best do you guys do that? Or how do you...
Do you mean like advocates? How do they become advocates for your product?
Exactly.
Okay.
How do you educate, instead of just selling, how do you educate your customers to be your own advocates?
How do you make your customers into an advocate?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's there's no one way to do that aspect of it, but technically, if you look at it, there are only 4 ways you can do that. They have to be satisfied. They would, you know that if they're buying it again, then they would do that aspect. Third is, would they recommend it to to others? And if you have a competitive and social advantage and all. But the most important dynamics which we see is the recommendation part of it. And that's, if they're willing to recommend, then in terms of they're closer to becoming advocate, not quite advocate, but closer to that aspect of it. So it's all of those 4 or 5 things combined.
I would also add, tell their stories, not your story.
Yeah.
And certainly the social media platforms that we have right now are absolutely enable this. So, I mean, there's a number of different examples that we've used in terms of having people become characters inside of a graphic novel that Axe did, for example. Things, engage them first, allow them to have, tell the stories of how they've used the brand and what they love about the brand. So there's really an active listening that has to go on as well. And then for sure, net promoter scores and all those other things are very important. But if you give them the mic, if you will, they will be there for good times and bad. So I've even seen where inevitably people will have situations where for whatever reason somebody comes out on the negative side. It's so phenomenal to watch consumers, advocates actually defend the brand, and you get to see all this activity. So I think it's one of the beautiful things about democratizing branding in general to the people, which also gets back to the put people first. But if you engage them and you create platforms for them to create their own, it's quite liberating and refreshing.
Yeah, we did the survey on trust before, but other surveys that you can see have done it for years. The top of the list historically are people like me, right? So if people who are looking for financial services or people who are looking for beauty products or for technology solutions, you tend to trust them, and if they're advocating for your brand, it's going to have way more impact than anything we do through formal channels. One thing we've learned in the past couple of years is I think all of us have pay, don't earn strategies, and we're remixing all the time. We've learned the interplay between owned assets that we create and earned, meaning social. And a couple of years ago, we kind of put the word out to our agencies and to our staff saying, design assets to be shared. And we just sort of put a big headline and just walked around for a year saying, designed to be shared, designed to be shared. And everyone thought initially, oh, we know how to do that. We put a like button on there or it's up on YouTube. But designed to be consumed is what we're really good at. But when you actually design something that causes somebody to want to share it to their network, digitally, but also just word of mouth, you can activate that and amplify it. And it turns out that it's actually not very easy to do, especially in our case being a B2B brand. But you can create all kinds of assets, and then you can use things like Tumblr and Pinterest and Twitter and so forth, where people do want to share a piece of knowledge, something they learned, something they found useful or helpful with their network, with their endorsement. Very, very powerful. Last thing I'd add there is then you instrument it. Because you put something up on Tumblr, and off it goes. And if you've instrumented it, you know where it went. And if you put things in there like trackbacks, you can see whether other people who receive that thing from a person they trust, they go back, and then they come back to us. And you start to literally see this thing light up as a system. And it's very exciting, Because it's not just hits and likes and downloads, it's actually engagement in a very modern way.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, this advocacy or engagement, people think of it as sort of a 0-1, but you can have a range of this. And from behavioral economics, you know that you have to make it easy for people to advocate, right? So the easier it is to advocate for the company or the brand, you have to have what Arun said, what I would call the necessary condition. You have to be satisfied, you have to like it, but are satisfied many times doesn't mean we go around telling everybody about it. So you have to make it easy. And the engagement, to give you an example, so Timberland had run this program where you could plant a tree, as part of their environment, helpfulness, and so on. But planting a tree means you have to take the day off from work, go someplace. That's a couple of hours. I like Timberland, but maybe not that much. But they added a virtual tree. You can plant a virtual tree, maybe, and then somebody at Timberland would plant a tree if you want to really connect the dots so that it's not just a, facile act. But suddenly it creates engagement in a simpler way, yet allowed the people to create the link to the brand, create engagement, and build the link between the brand and the customer. So I think oftentimes when people think about, advocacy, I think that it's the job of the company to think about how do I make it easy for my best customers. The worst customers will find a way to, disadvocate. What is the right word here? I don't know. And for you, but you have to make it easier for sort of the satisfied people to take the little time to say positive things. Yes.
On the other side of the sort of engagement and the contact, how do you deal with crises? I know that if you go to a hotel and you have a bad experience, you can instantly put it on TripAdvisor and say this hotel is terrible. Or also you talked about Target and how they've had the issue. JP Morgan, has had some of the issues. How do you deal with social media and all that when there's negative things that are coming out immediately? How do you sort of do damage control?
I think the answer is with great integrity and transparency. So you never block. If someone's actually reaching out and saying something like, this is what happened, we will, back to my real-time comments, we can have people that will put something out that says, we're sorry that you had this experience, please contact us so that we can learn from that and so forth. So it is the, there's a humility to it, there's a compassion component, but ultimately there's transparency and making sure that everybody gets to say what they have to say. And no one's perfect. No one's ever going to get everything 100% right. But I think this is where, hopefully, when we say net promoter scores, it's the people who would advocate versus the detractors, and hopefully that ratio is on the plus side. So we're very, very thoughtful, but mostly transparent, for sure, with great integrity about what those experiences should be. And we do this, by the way, because we don't necessarily interact directly with our consumers, our retail customers as well. There's a whole, a collaboration about how to handle situations such as those.
There's an interesting story, and sometimes you can preempt these things. During the financial crisis, this was one of the CMOs that a very large credit card company was talking about this, that when they started reducing people's credit limits, they had to at that time, the risk had gone up tremendously, and people were very upset. And halfway through, they realized that they didn't explain it. They just brought it down, and they started saying, we are sorry, this is the reason we have to do it. And to your point about net promoter scores, they shot back right up. So I think sometimes it's an interesting case when you have to take a decision which might have some potential negative backlash. How do you proactively manage that process as opposed to reactively then decide what to do? That was an interesting story because they learned a lot from this. They said, we really need to understand how to communicate whenever we are doing certain things, whether it's, the banks had a case when they would start charging you a fee for certain thing or stop giving you certain levels of interest. How much do they communicate and how do you do that effectively can be a helpful way of doing it as well.
So can you, and Ravi and I, we used to teach a class together, and he has a great example of that, the guitar, the airlines one. So you want to talk about that?
If you haven't seen it, you should go see YouTube, United Breaks Guitars, of this person who was traveling in a United Airlines flight, and they tossed his guitar. And of course, he was a budding singer, so he made a song about it, got a lot of hits, got a career started. And initially, I had a whole dynamics of how United responded to it, over a period of 4 days. And initially, the reaction was do nothing, deny everything, blame it on the weather. And when the number of hits started going up, they got in touch with him. It's a very fascinating case of how you deal with PR crisis in real time, and how hard it can be to really manage it, very well. My second favorite example, if you haven't seen it, you should also YouTube it, is Federal Express. This happened in the last winter season. The Federal Express delivery guy took the plasma TV and really chucked it across the
Over the gate.
over the gates. There was a security camera. There's no volume to this videotape, but the security camera captured this Federal Express guy doing this. So as you can imagine, this went viral immediately. But what happens is now more and more you see it goes from social media to mainstream media. So after that, it gets picked up by New York Times, the late night comedians, and so it's no longer like only 10 million hits. If that's not impressive enough for you, it's now 100 million hits. And the story I tell here is that you had like lots of people now looking at Federal Express, the brand built on service, reliability, delivery, being made fun of by late night comedians, which is also worth watching if you go, because they exaggerate, they amplify, they caricature what the company did. Then they said, oh, I saw lots of other Federal Express delivery guys, and then they showed them kicking the product and blowing it up, all kinds of stuff. But what's interesting here is Federal Express did respond very quickly, in fact, within 2 days, and they put up this videotape online on YouTube of a very serious-looking VP of customer service saying that we take this all seriously, and this is not what we do as a company. But the reality is that then you should look at the number of hits for that. Nobody's going to send that viral. It's not interesting at all. So maybe 50,000 people saw that, but 50 to 100 million people saw the actual one. So there is a real challenge here of amplification, both on the positive side and on the negative side, and how should marketers think about that, I think is a really interesting and important question. We have time for one last question after this, so be prepared.
There's something similar with Unilever on infant formula and how it was used in Africa. A product, and probably totally outside your area, but I recall negative publicity on that. If you had a global
I think it was
brand.
Nestle's, I think.
It's
Oh, it's
not us.
Nestle's. I'm
we
sorry.
don't sell infant
Excuse
formula.
me. I'm sorry. It was
It's okay.
Nestle's.
Okay.
You're right. The industry is important.
One last question in the audience. Michael, to pick on you. Any thoughts? Yes, Michael runs a lot of digital and at Yale University of a lot of the brand stuff.
I'll look for free advice. What would you say the brand, and particularly since we're in this great new place, of SOM is, and how can we best activate SOM people and alumni and friends to propel that brand? So what is it in a crisp way, and what ways can the institution do better
This is a
marketing?
question for the dean, I think. Gina, you want to take? I think it's interesting.
How about you?
I will take it up to you. Yeah.
I will take it. First of all, I think as Indra put, during the earlier panel, it's really impacted me in a profound way. And I think at that time, and certainly there's a root to this. It's this notion of the interdisciplinary, and at that moment, 25 years ago, it was very much about how the public and the nonprofit and the private sectors need to, work together, but also the transference of skills was very, very important to me then. And I think it was quite prescient in terms of the mission of the school, now evolving into an even bigger platform. But I think it's just a fantastic place where collaborative, innovative thinking goes on. And I, in particular, was really just so impressed that some of our alums, many of our alums, very illustrious alums, there are also people who are doing really amazing things on social entrepreneurship and impact. I think, there's a few of us who are like Aspen Fellows and so forth. And so when you start to build, and I know there's a program itself within Yale that is just amplifying this whole thing with great ambassadors of enlightened leadership. And I think the root of it starts here at SOM, which is just an amazing, all-in faculty, very, very different and unique approach to management. And I still hold, just like Indra does, my MPPM, even though I applaud all the people who did the MBA piece as well. Just that whole management area was just amazing, and to this day. And I'm just so thrilled that it's gotten to this point now. And then the fact that Yale still is quite flexible, as I understand it, I believe it's still the case in terms of the curriculum and how all the professional schools can work together in very creative ways. I think that's a microcosm for the world, frankly. So I don't know if that speaks to the most current branding component.
So my take is, and maybe we can have Arun and John react to that, my take. I think, and I'll talk about universities and educational institutions in general as opposed to SOM or Yale. I think if you think about branding of business schools or universities, we're talking about the very top levels of schools, they start getting very blurry because they all talk about leadership, they all talk about being generalists. Unlike companies, they don't want to be in a specific niche. And so thinking about branding for these things in terms of the output, like, oh, we produce X number of CEOs or NGOs or entrepreneurs, I think barring very few institutions, in part because of their location, not because of what they do. Stanford comes to mind because of location, not because of anything they do in their curriculum on entrepreneurship, for example. I think the differentiation for educational institution is much more useful around the process, which is, I think, some of the things you're saying, like, what is the secret sauce when you spend the 2 years in terms of, or 4 years as an undergrad? What kind of learning was it? What kind of environment was it? What kind of thinking, interdisciplinary stuff you had? And that, I think, when you tell people, it varies a lot because they have a stereotype. What does a graduate from Yale look like versus a Harvard look like, or a Princeton or a Brown look like, or a MIT look like? They have that stereotype in terms of the process, but not necessarily in where they end up going in terms of their careers. So I think you don't see the process being as much differentiated in the business world. You see a lot of differentiation happening in the outcome level. And I think for institutions, because they're so generalist, they want to attract the best talent from every area, from every part of the world. My sort of take on this is a process differentiation, what's better. I don't know if you guys had any thought on this.
I'll just add very quickly. There's one thing which is unique I found here in 2 years that I was here was the students here are very humble. So if you go to a lot of other schools, business schools, top 10 business schools, you get a very different kind of characteristics versus the students here. So it's just adding that aspect. Those are the things could be a differentiator.
Do you want to be famous or do you want to be influential? So, I think about the fact that you have a great brand, very prestigious, people respect it, they want to come here, lots of different ways, right, of coming here. I think you could borrow a page from TED. I mean, how many people get to go to a TED conference, but how many people are influenced by TED now because of the TED Talk phenomenon? How many people are going to be able to come to Yale as a student or to a forum like this? Very few. But what TED's done is not just package up stuff and put it up. They've created their own design to be shared, right? A particular format, like the Khan Academy and Coursera, they figured out how to be influential in a different medium. I think it's amazing to me that why is that TED, right? Davos hasn't done it. Universities really haven't done it. And what are they? I mean, they just figured out a format, frankly, and became known for it. So if the goal of Yale is to be, in addition to being respected and prestigious and pursuing its mission, but also to be influential in the science of management or whatever, however you define it, there are lots of things available to do it that I think be very profound here.
Great. On that note, thank you so much.
Thank you.